Well, hey, good afternoon, folks. This is Bill Costanzo, Livestock Guardian Dog Program Specialist at the AgriLife Center here in San Angelo. Sorry we had some technical difficulties. For those of you that are still hanging in here, I sure do appreciate it. Uh, Mr. Mark Taylor is going to give you all a presentation today on using livestock guardian dogs on hunting leases. He manages the Sonora Station property and has some unique ideas for you on kind of how to handle using guard dogs and on a hunting lease. So with that, we're still having some technical difficulties. We can hear Mark and see his screen, but he's not able to hear from us. So if you've got any questions or anything, feel free to post those in the chat, and we'll get started here in just a second. I do want to thank our sponsors, Spot On Fence and Lone Star Tracking for providing sponsorship for our webinar today, and also the Sheep and Goat Predator Management Board for providing funding for the program. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mark, and we'll get started, sir.
All right, thanks, Bill. And I apologize, I'm having some audio difficulties. So just let me know if I need to stop or do anything. But I appreciate the opportunity to hop on and speak today. My name is Mark Taylor. I'm with Prescribed Hunts. We are the outfitter for the Texas A&M AgriLife Research Sonora Station. We manage the hunts at the station. So I want to talk a little bit today on our experience with the livestock guard dogs and our hunts there on the station. So again, my name is Mark Taylor. I'm not your typical outfitter. My background's more in engineering. I have a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Texas A&M. I'm also a licensed PE in multiple states. Engineering is my day job, and hunting is kind of more of my passion that I get to do for fun. And I've been doing engineering for over 20 years. I started my career in Dallas, and during that time, I was fortunate to meet a beautiful, amazing, smart woman, Alicia, that I was highlighting my life as being able to convince her to be my wife. But she's also very passionate about animals, so that has kind of given myself as well as our company a different perspective kind of on the livestock guard dogs. We actually own a small goat farm or ranch in Bosque County in Meridian. We raise goats. As a result of that, we have utilized livestock guard dogs with our herd for protection. So I'm very familiar with livestock guard dogs, their value and their job and what they do. We have most of the basic kinds of livestock guard dogs. We have Great Pyrenees, we have Anatolians, and we have the Akbash as well. So I think both as an engineer and as a rancher, it kind of gives me a unique perspective into hunting. I've been a hunting guide on the research station since 2015. And then in 2022 till now, we served as the outfitter as Prescribed Hunts. Alicia and I started Prescribed Hunts when we took over the outfitting there. And these are just kind of pictures of us and some of our dogs and some of our goats. And this is Coda. She's our namesake for Coda Ranch, which is our small ranch. And as an engineer, I think my primary job is to come up with solutions that are both economical and efficient to problems. And that's kind of part of hunting. And just a little bit of history on hunting on the station. 1970 was the first year the station had paid hunters. And at that time, hunters were assigned their own pasture. They'd be dropped off and they were told to stay in the pasture. But of course, with them walking around or moving or making noise, they could sometimes quickly drive all the deer out of the pasture. So they would start looking in other pastures and start wandering into other pastures just in pursuit of deer. To help with that, blinds were eventually introduced, and then the rule was stay in your blind, and that helped a little. Um, and eventually, feeders came along, and corn was used as an attractant to maximize the hunting opportunities. And on the station, we don't feed year round. We only start feeding about a month before our scheduled hunts. So, for instance, we had a hunt earlier this month. We didn't start feeding till right at the beginning of October. So we don't do it year round. And we also do it a bit different. We do weekend hunts where we have all the hunters come in for an extended weekend. It would be a Friday through a Monday of hunting. The reason we do that is we don't want hunters trickling in and out all season long. The goal there is to provide as little disruption to the day-to-day operations at the station as possible. Historically, there's only been one hunt that we had done each fall on the station, but with kind of the rise in the population of the axis, we've started doing more hunts to kind of help control the axis population a little bit. So we currently are doing two hunts in the fall, one in November, one in December, and then two in the spring. Uh, and on each hunt, we don't have any more than 25 hunters. And we've also started doing a veterans hunt in the spring as well, where we have a handful of veterans come in for just a free axis hunt. But this just kind of shows that hunting has evolved on the station and will continue to evolve. And the livestock guard dogs are just the latest instance where we've had to adjust. And since we potentially have up to 90 hunters per year, so we get a lot of feedback as to what they're seeing in the blinds and when they're hunting. And they're quick to share their opinion, especially if something doesn't go right during their hunt. Some of the feedback we've received from hunters is they'll say the corn's just piling up, and that's the most obvious sign. Um, we've even had some hunters say it's like a yellow spray can blew up, and this is just due to deer just exiting the pasture once a dog is introduced. Uh, we've had hunters even report that the dogs themselves were chasing off the deer, and part of our fear is that the feeder could potentially serve as a dinner bell. You know, dogs get familiar with the sound of the feeder and associate that with deer, and just come a running. Um, and we've also had hunters report that there's just only small deer left in the pasture. That's because all the older ones that are able can clear the fences and get out of there, and just all the younger, smaller ones are stuck in there. And of course, that's not an appealing hunt to hunters. They've even said that the dogs would come up to the blinds, and had an instance where a hunter just brought the dog in the blind with them just to get him out of sight. And it just comes down to our hunters just don't want to hunt in pastures where there's dogs. They feel like it just ruins their hunt. And we've even had instances where we're aware of where the dogs are located, but they can get out of those pastures and wander into other pastures. So uh, even if you're not hunting in a pasture with a dog, you could potentially wind up seeing one. And some of the methods we've kind of come up with and adapted to over the last few years. This is a map of the station. The pastures have changed up slightly this past year, but as you can see, there's a lot of individual pastures. And the easiest thing to do is avoid the pastures with livestock and livestock guard dogs. Basically, just don't hunt there. We found that it's easier to just try to avoid the situation altogether, mainly because we don't want to give a hunter a bad hunt or potentially ruin a hunt for them. And we also want to look out for the safety of the dogs and the livestock. You know, we warn our hunters every hunt about the potential of them seeing the dogs, but just as an extra precaution, we try not to hunt where the dogs are. It just is a better safety for everyone, for the dogs, and better hunting for the hunters. We've also looked at positioning the blinds and feeders to avoid the livestock and the livestock guard dogs. We do this by trying to put the blind and the feeder in separate pastures. And the logic behind that is, well, maybe the dog will come up to the blind, but it won't interfere with the feeder, or maybe they'll go up to the feeder and not interfere with the hunter. It just kind of potentially creates a buffer where you're not compromising both your blind and your feeder. Another option that proved successful on the station this past November was pinning up or relocating livestock guard dogs. That was both of those were utilized, and we had a pretty successful hunt in November. One herd and dogs were pinned up at the station headquarters, and several other of the dogs and livestock were moved on to another ranch. And we found that was a very, very successful method for the hunting. And if it comes down to it and there's really nothing you can do, you just want to try to maximize your hunting options, or limit your interaction chances if you just have no other alternatives. So the first item I want to talk about is avoiding the pastures altogether. And the best way we've come up with in doing this is creating other blinds or other areas that we are able to hunt. Because basically, you just don't want to hunt where the dogs are. You want to try to add new blinds as a backup. So if you have to have dogs in a certain pasture, a certain area, you have other options where you can hunt. We've done this by adding just over 12 blinds in the last couple years. That's what you see here in red. All the red squares and triangles are new blinds we've added. And a lot of these are temporary. That way, if we need to move them somewhere else based on where the dogs are, we can. It just gives us more flexibility. And we also try to look for places where dogs or livestock won't be, basically places that aren't fenced in or enclosed. So this is just an example. Again, this is a map of the station broken down where our blinds are. This was from a hunt from a couple years ago. The green shaded areas were where livestock and dogs were located. And based on these locations, we were basically not going to hunt 7 blinds. But because we had introduced all these other new blinds, we weren't really compromising our hunting or places where to put hunters during the hunts, because we had so many backup blinds. And this blue area kind of shows an example of utilizing locations where we know there's not going to be any dogs. This is the county road that runs through the station. Because of that, these blue areas aren't fenced in, because you'd have to fence across the road. So we looked in these areas and were able to add 2 additional blinds to this area, which just kind of maximizes our hunting potential and gives us just more options that we know is not going to be compromised or shut down on future hunts. Because one of the most valuable thing we have when we're doing these hunts is our time. And if we put in time fixing a blind, putting in corn, filling it, and then all of a sudden pastures have to be rotated for livestock, and now a dog is introduced in that pasture, and now we don't want to hunt that just kind of wasted our time. So looking for these locations where livestock cannot be is vital to kind of saving our time, and has worked out well for us. And these are just some examples of some of the blinds I was talking about. Initially, the blinds on the station are well-built metal structures, either single elevated, double elevated, or ground blinds. And unless you have heavy equipment, which we don't have access to, it's hard to move these. It's these four shown up here on the top. So we've tried to utilize blinds that are easily transported or lightweight, but also work well and are usable for all types of hunters. Um, and those are kind of this quad blind, the tripod, or we've even had blinds built on trailers that we can easily move around. We've also had good success with just a plain pop-up ground blind. Um, and again, you want to have multiple backup locations in mind so you can easily move these to a new location based on where your dogs are located. And again, these are economical, ranging in price from a couple $100 up to $400 or $500. Uh, and again, they're easily transported. Just small trailer and an ATV, you can load them up and move them really anywhere you need them to be. And positioning on them is key as well. um, Again, you want to try to position your blinds and feeders in separate pastures, uh, and also have feeders that can be easily relocated. Um, these are some kind of higher end feeders, but the good side to them is you can easily move them. You can even drag them if you had to. They have little skids on them. This is an example of a blind we utilized this past November. This is in one of the high fence portions of the station. It's a 10-foot tall quad blind that we put right on the high fence. And on this past hunt, the dogs and livestock were located on the same side that the blind is located. Now, on the other side of the fence, there was not any dogs or livestock, and this is where we put this feeder. Now, in our December hunt, things may be switched. The livestock and dogs could be on the opposite side and nothing on the side the blind is. So to accommodate that, it's just a quick 15-minute fix of just dragging the feeder back over to the opposite side. So little things like that can make a big difference. Another thing we've utilized is even just a 4-foot little platform just to clear a 4-foot fence, just to be able to shoot over the fence with just a pop-up blind. This has worked really well for us. Other things to consider are where you position your feeder within the feeder pen. This is an example of a feeder pen. The majority of our feeders are surrounded by just paneling to keep the livestock out. Ideally, you want to have your feeder centered within that pen, just so you're not throwing corn outside the limits of it, because that would cause your goats or your sheep or your other livestock to come up and try to eat that. And of course, dogs would come up with them. Height considerations of your feeder is another thing. The higher your feeder is, the broader it's going to cast out the corn. So those are just other things to keep in mind as you're kind of laying out your blinds and your feeders. And this is just another example of a kind of a mid-sized blind. This one's only 6 feet. And again, very economical and very portable. Another thing we've kind of really spent a lot of time on is looking into different kinds of attractants. Corn's great, feeders are great, but they can only do so much. We've kind of tried to find other methods of bringing in the deer, especially if you have dogs around, just to really entice them and to get them to come within the hunter's range. We've done this by looking at online forums or chat rooms. That's a good resource. But also, like I mentioned earlier, we have up to 90 hunters a year, and they're great resources. Of course, a lot of them have their own theories and may not mean much, but they're worth looking into. We have hunters come in from all over Michigan, Florida, Georgia, Alabama. So they all have their own local tales and stuff they like to use or have heard of. So some of these that we've tried out and worked, and y'all may be familiar with them, some y'all maybe not, but cottonseed and alfalfa are kind of pretty common. Just an example of a cottonseed feeder on the station. The deer tend to go for that pretty regularly. Alfalfa is also the same. One we've found that has really been successful that the deer just love is this chafe hay or chaff hay. It's basically fermented molasses, and it comes in these 40 or 50 pound bales. But the deer just really love it. Other things we've started using this year that were recommendations from hunters is peanut meal and rice bran, and these can be more on kind of the early antler growth feeding periods, but we don't try to do that on the station. Like I said, we only feed a month before our hunts, so we were utilizing these as an attractant, and the deer seemed to really love them as well, based on hunter feedback and what we had seen on game cameras. So we've been utilizing this to kind of entice the deer to get them to come into the feeders more, even in the presence of the dogs. But the drawback to these is you're leaving this stuff out, and that can start deer getting patterned or trained to feed at night. So there are products out there, such as this feeder from a company called Tectonic Feeder. And what this does is it works just like a time. It has a timer on it, and you set the time like you would on a normal feeder. And when it goes off, the lids raise. And the thought behind it is this will be closed at night, but readily available during the day or during your typical hunting times. But a product like this can basically try to limit night feeding. So this is not a product we've looked into yet. It's on the list, but it's something we hope to research more and hopefully utilize on future hunts. But these are just attractants we've had success with, and have seen good results on bringing in the deer and keeping them at the feeding areas longer, even in the presence of dogs. Water is another big key attractant. If you have it on your ranch or where you're hunting, I would highly recommend utilizing it. What we've seen from Axis is ones that we are able to pattern is that they'll come into water at least twice a day and sometimes drink for up to a minute. And in cases where we don't have water, we've even looked at bringing in temporary water. This is just I think they call it a paint tub that you can get from Tractor Supply. It's only about $20 or $30, but we've utilized these and have had success with temporarily bringing in deer on locations that weren't conducive to water or having water troughs. So we've also looked on the station in areas that had water troughs and have modified our blinds, moved some to those blinds or adjusted existing blinds or repositioned them to where you could hunt both the feeder and water. This was an area on the station we identified where 4 pastures came together in one location. And at this location, there were 3 water troughs. So really, if there's anything in these pastures, they all have to come to this one location if they want to drink. And we set up a blind. All it was the platform with the pop-up right along this fence line. And this has proven to be one of our more successful blinds the last couple of years, just because of water. We don't have a feeder at this location. We will put out the attractants, but there's no feeder whatsoever. And this is another good location because if livestock or dogs are in any one of these pastures, you're still able to hunt this location just because you're basically hunting 4 pastures at one location. And this is kind of what I touched on earlier. You want to try to identify locations like this where you can maximize your success even in the presence of dogs. And so again, the station really worked with this past November. The staff there, Dr. Tollison and Colson Brown, they both do a great job in helping out as much as they can with the hunting. But this past or earlier this month, like I mentioned, they moved some of the dogs and livestock to another ranch, and they also pinned up at the headquarters. And this seemed to help us have a successful hunt. Now, what we have observed from game cameras is if you remove the dogs from a pasture, the whitetail deer um, respond pretty quickly. We've seen them it only taking a few days for them to recover and start coming back to the feeders like they did before the dogs and the livestock were introduced to the pasture. Axes, on the other hand, tend to take up to a month from what we've seen. So if if you're looking at pinning or relocating, it's good to kind of keep that in mind based on whatever you're hunting. If you're just doing whitetail, it doesn't really make that big of a difference from what we've seen once you remove them. But if you are doing more axis hunts, I would suggest try to remove them earlier, uh, the better. Just from what we've seen, it works better for the axis to have a longer lead time. And we have seen good success in high fence areas, regardless of the dogs, even in their presence. They're in the high fence, so they have to come drink, they have to come eat. So if you have the opportunity to move them to a high fence area, even if you're hunting in that area, that would work better from what we've seen than having them in a low fenced area. And these are a couple of examples on kind of maximizing your options and limiting your interactions. So this is a blind that is on the station. The blind location is shown in red, and the feeder is shown in yellow. And on this particular blind, we just had basically one shooting lane, and this was really all you could see in this particular pasture. Um, but there were two water troughs located in this pasture that were outside of the shooting lane. So unless you knew they were there, you can't see them from the blind and you can't hunt them. So when I say kind of improve your existing blinds or feeders or increase your chances of a more successful hunt, um, I'm talking about adding another feeder or adding water or just utilize what you already have. And the way we kind of modified this location was we put in a quad blind at this location instead of where the existing blind was. This is a big, heavy, elevated metal blind, and this is our new quad. In this location, you're able to hunt the feeder, you're able to hunt both water troughs. And what this does is it increases your chances. And we started this a couple springs ago, and there was actually a dog with a herd of goats in this pasture. And the first day of the hunt, we didn't want hunters to hunt it because we were afraid that the dog and the livestock would ruin their hunt. But this is historically a popular blind, and we had hunters want to hunt in there, so we let them with the understanding that yes, there's a dog and yes, there's livestock. Um, so because of this new setup and the feedback we received from the hunters was that basically even with the dog and the goats, it was still extremely successful with a nice axis buck being killed the following 3 days of the hunt. And this, by the end of the hunt, this was one of the more popular blinds, and everybody was wanting to get in this blind. But the feedback from the hunters was because they had basically three options, even if the dog or the livestock went to one of these, they still had two to hunt from. So it just maximizes their options and gives them a better chance, even if there is interaction with a dog or with livestock. But basically, what it all comes down to, and what I've learned from my career as an engineer, I've gotten to work on a lot of cool projects, a lot of projects I'm proud of because they were for A&M. I was the project engineer for the renovation of the MSC in College Station, and also military walk. And I even got to work on Kyle Field renovation, the feasibility of it. I've also done some stuff for TCU. I've done hundreds of miles of 9-foot diameter pipeline for projects anywhere from a couple millions getting close to the billions of dollars. And the biggest key that I've learned in my career as an engineer is communication. A lot of the issues that arise during construction, uh, if you have issues come up, it typically goes back to inadequate communication. Well, the same holds true for the interaction of hunters and livestock guard dogs. If you have hunters, you have to communicate. You have to make them aware of where they're located. You have to let them know not to pet them, not to feed them, because then they'll want to come around more. But I've carried this over into my interactions with the staff at the station. One of the first things I do if I'm going to go to the station is I call up the ranch foreman, Colson, and I check in on where are the dogs located, where are the goats located, where are the livestock located, just so I'm aware and we can concentrate our efforts on filling feeders or getting blinds ready in areas that where they're not located, and just to be up to date on what they're planning, if they're wanting to rotate pastures or move livestock, move dogs. Communication's key, and uh, so I would encourage you to keep in constant contact with your hunters and keep them aware of what you have going on with your livestock or with your dogs. Um, so that's about all I have for today. This is my contact information. Um, my number is here, my email's here, and also on Instagram. And I'll kind of look at the chat, and um, if there's any questions, I'll try to answer them. And I guess I'll keep unless I get a stop from Bill. But anyway, I appreciate the time today, and certainly if you have any kind of questions, feel free to reach out through any of these methods. Um, so what type of price range? So we do it based on packages, and if you want to call or text me, I'm happy to answer any of those questions on how we do that. I see that question from Cody.
Well, folks, does anybody have any questions? I see that y'all had posted a question about our I'm assuming it's our YouTube channel that folks are wanting, or unless I don't know, Mark, do you have a YouTube channel as well, or hold on, folks, I'm getting you that link here right now. Well, any other questions from those that are still logged on today? Well, uh, okay, folks. Well, if nobody has any questions, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Apologize for some of the technical difficulties we had today, but for those that hung in there, I appreciate it. Again, I want to thank our sponsors, Spot On Fence. If you're looking for some sort of an invisible fence system for your guard dogs, I would recommend reaching out to Spot On, and they can get you set up with one of their callers. Also, Lone Star Tracking. If you're looking for any GPS trackers for your dogs, I would encourage you to reach out to Thomas there at Lone Star Tracking, and he can get you set up with the same type of trackers that we use. Our next guard dog webinar will be in February. Tentatively, we have scheduled a breed presentation on the Kangal breed. And well, there's a question for Mark, I guess.
See a question from Grant. There's typically not that much barking that goes on. If there is, it's usually at the headquarters. And to my knowledge, I don't think we've had any complaints on barking.
And I do want to mention, folks, that Mark has worked with me on a fact sheet, and that fact sheet should be published sometime, hopefully before the end of this year. It's already over at our Ag Communications department, and it has some additional information and some of those great pictures, and of different ways to set up the blinds and stuff like that he included here in the presentation today. Do we have any other questions or comments or anything? Okay, well, I think that's going to be it. Thank you very much, Mark. I sure appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to do the workshop for us today. Like I said, folks, we'll see you in February, and it should be for the Kangal breed webinar. So, thank you very much for everybody tuning in. Sure appreciate it. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.